Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the Clown Decade. The decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And if you want to keep up on all things Clown Decade, please do subscribe to the channel and of course, become a member if you have the spare cash. But goodness me, you want a story that is going to be one of the highlights, or I guess lowlights of Clown Decade, it is going to be this one. This has been a career ruiner. This has effectively put people on the back foot when they are trying to defend certain Tories for being incredibly based. Turns out no. A lot of our base Tories were involved in one of the most scandalous cover-ups I have seen probably ever, or at the very least since I started this YouTube channel. Is it as bad as the grooming gangs? Probably not. However, it is a rather large one for the 2020s, so let's get right into this, because there's a lot to get through. So, from The Times, revealed leak that risked lives of 100,000 Afghans and £7 billion cover-up. A dataset was emailed to the wrong people, leading to fears of a Taliban kill list, a huge evacuation and unprecedented super injunction. Yet someone in the MOD had a complete, for lack of a better term, cock-up, and emailed the wrong list when he was effectively trying to get people vetted to see if they were effectively able to come over to Britain. And instead of just emailing over a list of, I don't know, a few hundred names, he sent over like hundreds of thousands, quite clearly. I nearly said 24,000, but that's just the number of soldiers who came over. Anyway, details. Let's get into the details. The British military is responsible for a data leak that put up to 100,000 Afghans at risk of death. Successive governments have spent years fighting to keep it a secret, using an unprecedented super injunction. And I'm going to throw this out early. The idea that the list would lead to Afghans' risk of death is somewhat of a misnomer. That's an assumption you take when you don't really understand how the Taliban and Afghan society works. From what I'm hearing from people who are much more an expert in that than I am, effectively because Afghanistan is mostly made up of, well, tightly knit communities, it's not exactly a secret which communities were fighting for and against the Taliban. And if there was a split, well, pretty much everyone would know which side you were on. And not only that, but there were data leaks from the US as well that were much more substantial than this, that the Taliban already had their hands on. So a list of 100,000 more, it's probably not actually risking death much more than, well, their risk of death already was after a surrender like that. Because bear in mind how the US left. They just left an absolute shed load of documents and things like that. Hell, even Callum managed to find a load of US aid stuff, and they have a load of US weaponry. There's no way this data leak will have put them more at risk than they already were. But anyway, some 24,000 Afghans affected by the breach have either been brought to the UK already or will be in a future part of the biggest covert evacuation operation in peacetime. Up to £7 billion of taxpayer money was once earmarked to handle the fallout. £7 billion? And by the way, just so people know, £7 billion, again, get this out early, that is not the full cost of this secret evacuation. A number within that £7 billion, probably a very large portion actually, was earmarked for this secret evacuation, given it's the biggest ever. And given that that money's probably an underestimation, knowing how the British state are, in reality, the money you're looking at for this, specifically for this secret evacuation, still in the, I don't know, 5 billion range, something like that. And if I were you, I'd bear in mind that it's your tax money paying for this, you were never consulted on it, and in fact, you were forced to not actually know about this until the super injunction came to an end and the Labour government could reveal it. So I suppose thank you, Labour government, for not keeping this secret. John Healey, the Defence Secretary of the Labour government, obviously said he had felt deeply uncomfortable about what had happened and apologised on behalf of the government after senior MPs criticised the draconian gagging order. It's unbelievable how well off Labour are going to come out of this. It's only making them look good. I am very uncomfortable and deeply apologise for the fact that the previous government held this secret for so long from the British people. And as we'll get into, the Tories have absolutely nothing to say on it. They're just either avoiding the subject or they've been completely silent. Tan Desi, the Labour chairman for the Defence Select Committee, told the Times Radio the data breach and super injunction were an absolute mess and wholly unacceptable, and he said he was minded to carry out an investigation given the serious ramifications. So that's going to be an inquiry that takes another 4 years and nothing will happen from it, but there we go. It's shameful, I think, that those Afghans who bravely supported our service personnel are now at risk and could be subject to reprisals or recrimination, he said. Well, that's what happens when you lose a war. Mr. Justice Chamberlain, the judge presiding over the case, said the long-running and unprecedented order had given rise to serious free speech concerns and had left a scrutiny vacuum. You got that right. Handing down his judgment, he said the gagging order had the effect of completely shutting down the ordinary mechanism of accountability which operates in democracy. Why did you hand it down then? I suppose because the government has the power to force a judge to do that. UK government officials were also left exposed when in February 2022 a soldier inadvertently sent a list of tens of thousands of names to Afghans as he tried to help verify applications for sanctuary in Britain. The database of 33,000 records was then passed on, and one of the individuals who received it threatened to publish the dataset on Facebook, which it was feared would have given the Taliban what amounted to a kill list. The MOD would not confirm on Tuesday night if the individual had faced disciplinary action as a result or if anyone had been sacked. So we don't even know if anyone's been sacked over this. We do know that effectively the government were blackmailed over this, and because the government was blackmailed, basically 150,000 people have been allowed to move over. That is what's happened here. You could have one guy who accidentally was sent a list blackmail the entire government instead of effectively getting special forces to kill the guy. That is the priorities of the government. Dominic Cummings is not wrong when he says the governments are completely the wrong way around when it comes to making any sort of decision like this. The British people always come last, and whether that's because of incompetence, mental worldviews, or simply because they're being blackmailed, it doesn't matter. This has basically tainted everyone involved with this, and we'll get into the timeline soon, because as I say, there are base people you cannot trust anymore. The soldier responsible for the leak was operating under the command of General Sir Gwyn Jenkins, the current head of the Navy, who was Director of Special Forces at the time. Is he going to suffer any consequences for this? I don't know. How... Because he's also responsible for this in a way, because any data breach, obviously, it goes up to the top. Because the top is supposed to have safeguards in place to not let massive lists of protected data out to everyone. I know this, I work in data. And the way it usually works is they will effectively partition the data and make sure that, say, if you are going to send out something like this, it's not passed on as a file. You know, you copy and paste the bits you need into another file, give it a once over, and then that makes sure that only that new file is then sent off, so there's no hidden tabs, as they were trying to say for this, which I don't know about you, but I've not known many Excel spreadsheets to have hidden tabs. Either way, it's absolutely a crazy data breach, and obviously this general should be facing some consequences. When asked on Tuesday whether the Prime Minister retains full confidence in his naval chief, Starmer said he does. Okay, fair enough, I wouldn't. A highly secretive mission codename Operation Rubific was launched to shut down the leak and stop the details of the breach becoming public, because that's a priority. Protect the system, make sure no one knows that it's all built on matchsticks, and protect the most incompetent people that we know. The same thing, by the way, has happened with RAF Bryce Norton. It gets broken into by two morons on a couple of e-scooters. Nothing's happened. No one's been sacked. There's no change in security as far as I'm aware, and it's been dropped out of the news effectively. But everyone's now talking more about, isn't free speech a bit under attack because these people that committed terrorism against our RAF are decidedly terrorists and we're arresting people for it. That's what people talk about now, not the fact that an effective HR manager was put in charge of security of the base and managed to embarrassingly, humiliatingly have two random people spray paint and destroy a couple of jet engines. It's nuts. And this is just the pinnacle of it. In fact, according to Dominic Cummings, there's more super injunctions. They'll be way more covered up than this. It's ridiculous. A super injunction, the first to be deployed by the government and the longest ever, which prevented anyone from revealing the existence of such an order, was put in place in September 2023. Do you know who was Home Secretary at that time? It was Shiela Burrowes. Do you know who was the Defence Secretary at that time? It was Ben Wallace, but it was also, I believe, Grant Shapps. In fact, it was Grant Shapps at the time who ended up signing the injunction. But the government will have been pushing this injunction for some time, and obviously they will have been gagged until it was officially written in that they had to be gagged until, well, yesterday. And do you know who else will have been informed? Relevant civil servants. Do you know who that includes? Yes, Robert Jenrick, who was Immigration Minister at the time. If you don't think the Immigration Minister will have been made aware of an injunction about a literal immigration problem, then yeah, you are just naive. But we'll get into the whole drama around that soon. But one thing I will tell you, basically all the people that we thought were based, like Shiela Burrowes, and like Robert Jenrick, who are in the Tory party, have been completely silent for over 24 hours. They've got nothing to say on this. They frankly deserve to be scrutinised for all this, and we need to find out what their involvement exactly was, and frankly, they could be facing jail time, in my ideal world. Will we get that anytime soon? Probably not. Will we get that under reform? It's a hell of a lot more likely. Anyway, this was lifted on Tuesday after a 2-year legal battle spearheaded by The Times. There were concerns in government about the risk of rioting because the secret scheme bringing in thousands of Afghans. Well, you don't say. Crazy, isn't it? They have to constantly hide all these things for multiculturalism to work, because they know if people knew the truth about all this, there would probably not be a particularly peaceful society. I wonder if anyone was talking about that back in 1968. Again, people are fine with low levels of immigration. They're fine if they're here temporarily, or if they're not here temporarily, then if they integrate. That's generally been the rule of Britain for, God, centuries probably at this point. But then for some reason we decided, because we had an empire, that means it would be really easy for people from different countries to be able to integrate. Didn't happen. It's happened en masse. It's not happened. And now we've got Afghans, hundreds of thousands of them, who've come over in the past 2 or 3 years. Kept hidden, by the way. This isn't part of the Boris Wave numbers. Oh, no. This was kept hidden. The Boris Wave numbers, which we thought were about 900,000 net, something like that. No, it's gone over 1 million with this. Easily. And we don't even know the numbers because they weren't counting dependents, but we'll get into all that. This is a monumental disaster. This could genuinely spell the death of the Tories, and frankly, I hope it does. At the 11th hour, The Times and other media organisations were hit with a new interim injunction that blocked the publication of sensitive information about what exactly was on the database on the grounds of confidentiality and national security. The government argued the leak list still posed a potential risk to Afghans. I mean, honestly, I don't really think anyone really cares what's on the list, beyond does it include rapists. What we obviously all care about is, well, just knowing that this is happening. But no, we weren't allowed to know that this was happening. They had to keep it secret. More from you and me than the Taliban, by the way. That's the main reason they did this. The removal of the super injunction followed an independent review ordered by Healey and carried out by the retired civil servant Paul Rimmer that concluded early concerns about the intent of the Taliban to target those on the list had diminished. The review also found the super injunction may have made matters worse by increasing the value of the dataset to the Taliban. Again, how valuable actually was it? Because we know that they had datasets from the US anyway. More than likely, far more people were on those lists than what were on the one that our particular special forces operator sent by mistake. A lawsuit involving some 1,000 of those affected across the world being prepared against the government is expected to cost at least £250 million. So your tax money is also going toward this cover-up, by the way, so, you know, be happy about that, pay pigs. The vast majority of those affected by the leak, which have been described by activists as simply bone-chilling, were not warned they were in danger as ministers sought to cover it up. This is despite government fears that Taliban could suddenly come into the possession of the MOD database, which was in the hands of at least one potential blackmailer. It included sensitive information, including email addresses, phone numbers, about individual Afghan cases, as well as email addresses belonging to UK government officials. Well, they're safely in the UK now, I'd imagine, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just tell them to change email and phone number. But again, for the Afghans, when you lose a war and you surrender, it's never going to end up being particularly easy. And I'm not necessarily in this view, but the normie view is that they mainly cite the interpreters that helped us. They don't tend to cite the allies we had within Afghanistan. It's literally just those who directly were helping out the army with translation work and things like that. That seems to be the only cohort of people that most Brits think do deserve to come over as a refugee. You know, I don't necessarily agree with that. They were paid to do a job, they did it. Why does that mean they need refugee status? But realistically, the numbers that would include, if we're pushing it, probably in the hundreds, and that would be very low hundreds. It's nothing compared to the amount that we actually got, which is 1,000 times that. But either way, it's amazing as well. We don't even know if anyone's had punishment for this. I don't think any of them have. I think it's been completely covered up to try and cover everyone's backsides, and I think it was working until it didn't. And I think now heads need to roll, but I don't think they will. I do not think they will. I think there'll be an inquiry and nothing will happen from it yet again. So if the Taliban did gain access to the MOD, said as many as 100,000 Afghans would be at risk of death, torture, intimidation or harassment. Oh no, we have to bring over Afghans who are at risk of intimidation and harassment. Torture, maybe you have an argument. Death, maybe there's an argument there. Intimidation and harassment? Okay, anyway. The figure took into account the individuals who had applied for sanctuary in the UK, plus their family members, some of whom were named in the dataset. It was the stuff of nightmares, government lawyers said in court as they argued to maintain the super injunction. Yeah, it is. It is a nightmare for the government. It's an absolute nightmare for the Tories. Not even brought it up at PMQs yet, by the way. Just completely silent on it. Individuals in the UK and Pakistan are still believed to be in possession of the database, which the Times has seen and analysed. In at least one case, the list was exchanged for a huge sum of money, it is understood. The Taliban already have it, by the way. In fact, I'm pretty sure they came out and confirmed they've had it for ages. They pretty much had it straight away. That's how bad this data breach was, and yet there's still a need to massively hide the fact that they had to bring over hundreds of thousands of Afghans. It remained unclear whether the Taliban had managed to get hold of the list. At least they're claiming they did. One activist told the Times she believed they already had been working their way through it, killing people, saying she was convinced that dozens if not hundreds of Afghans had been beaten or died as a result. This allegation could not be verified, and the MOD claimed it had seen no concrete evidence the Taliban had it. Yes, well, you've got barely any intelligence in Afghanistan, so what do you expect? The Afghans, who were suddenly notified of the breach on Tuesday, described their situation as hopeless as they took urgent measures to protect themselves. Some of those listed had served alongside British troops, risking their lives in Afghanistan war before Western forces pulled out in August 2021 and the Taliban swept to power. Yeah, well, that's a risk of war, isn't it? And as I say, my position on it is, well, if you're in a war and you end up losing it, unfortunately there are consequences to that and we can't save everyone. Honestly, if we were much more selective on immigration and obviously with refugees and not just letting everyone who came over on the channel stay here, people like me would be much more willing to say, yeah, we can have, maybe a few hundred of them over, but I'm barely willing to say that. As I say, the normie view as interpreters, I can see the argument for that. But at this point, knowing with everything I know, yeah, absolutely no way I think that should happen. And on top of that, Tories to lend arrest. There's a reason that's my name on Twitter now. There's a reason I'm saying it every now and then in streams and videos. Because they covered this up, they did this, they hate you, or at least treat you with complete apathy. The only thing that matters to them is keeping themselves in elite positions. That's all that matters to them. Best way to break through that? Reform, effectively. It's literally our only chance. Many others had not, but were on the list because they had applied to come to the UK under the Afghan Relocation and Assistance Policy on the chance that they might have their application granted. In October last year, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, signed off a secret plan which had begun under the Tories to spend up to $7 billion over 5 years on bringing 25,000 of those affected to the UK. Oh, so no, Labour don't look good on this, they just continued it. They're just letting the super injunction go now, I suppose. But on top of that, again, this was the party that had the brass neck to talk about a 22 billion black hole, and then they secretly gave away another 7 billion. Of course taxes are going up. They literally just think that money is something that can come later. We've got to stop thinking like that. Court documents disclosed that the Cabinet's Home and Economic Committee, which included Reeves and Rayner, the Deputy PM, agreed to the plan remained appropriate. The 25,000 were not previously eligible to come to the UK. The policy was widened in June to include more than 42,500 individuals. My God. Oh, the MOD said the document given to court was not clear and said the 7 billion refers to the cost for all Afghan schemes. Yeah, so that's what the 7 billion comes from. It's not necessarily all for the secret plan, but a big chunk of it will be. And obviously the court document is there. So far, 18,500 Afghans, less than a fifth those affected, have already come to the UK, and on Tuesday, Healey scrapped the secret Afghan response route scheme to bring over the rest of those previously deemed at risk of retribution. This was after the review said the plan may now be disproportionate to the actual impact of the data loss were it to fall into Taliban hands, raising questions about why super injunction remained in place for so long. Great question. Healey told the news agent's podcast that the soldiers responsible was no longer doing the same job on the Afghan brief, and his first priority had not been to carry out a witch hunt of those responsible. Well, people are going to want one, I guarantee. Some 5,400 more Afghans who have already received invitation letters will be flown to the UK in the coming weeks, bringing the total number of Afghans affected by the breach brought to the UK to 23,900. The rest of the affected Afghans will be left behind. I'd like to point out at this point that this is just the Afghans who are obviously caught up, in this embarrassing and humiliating breach of data. This isn't including the dependents they're bringing. They're allowed to bring dependents. And as I say, they're uncounted. We have literally no idea how many dependents they've actually brought over. In fact, as we'll go through in another article quite quickly, some people have brought as many as 14 along with them. The average seems to be about, I don't know, 3 to 5, probably more than that. It's humiliating. And it's carrying on. At least we have a view to the end of this, but honestly, this should kill the Tories, and quite rightly. Anyway, moving on from the Times, we did have plenty of Twitter commentariat going through the Super Injunction Court document. I'll go through some quick highlights. And so on this day, before this hearing, 25 June 2025, I received a copy of the review report, prepared under supervision of the retired civil servant Paul Rimmer. An open version of this report is annexed to this judgment. I do not therefore need to summarise it. It is sufficient to say that it includes the conclusion with respect to individuals whose data is included in the dataset that acquisition of the dataset by the Taliban is unlikely to substantially change an individual's existing exposure given the volume of data already available. In other words, we had a data leak, we were blackmailed into bringing over a load of Afghanistanis, and as a result it turns out that actually the data leak basically didn't change the risk factor for these Afghanistanis at all. No change whatsoever, no change in risk. Just the same risk before as after. Nothing changed, and we still needed to bring them all over apparently. What a joke. It also includes the conclusion that it appears unlikely that merely being on a dataset would be grounds for targeting, and it is therefore also unlikely that family members, immediate or more distant, will be targeted simply for the principle appears in the dataset. In other words, them bringing over the dependents was completely moronic too, because they had no evidence that they would be targeted even though someone's name was on the list. This is what's happened. We've spent $7 billion, had an injunction to shut everyone up about it, keep you from knowing about it, all for something that didn't even change the risk factor of someone's death or torture. It's a joke. It's a total joke. Tories to lend arrest. To make this even worse, the injunction court order also included this paragraph. The review focuses on a risk posed to individuals affected by the dataset rather than broader risk to HMG. However, it is worth reflecting that several interlocutors expressed concerns around the risk that resettled Afghans could be radicalised in the UK. There is a risk of a growing gap between resettled Afghan expectations and the reality of what ever more stretched domestic services can deliver. Some interlocutors also highlighted concerns around the extent to which Afghanistan is becoming a base for a wide range of terrorist groups. This review strongly recommends that this should be an area of further work, and the Home Office will want to consider this in more detail. In other words, we're not vetting everyone properly. Some people even got rejected, by the way, on the original scheme and still got to come over anyway because we embarrassed ourselves and got blackmailed, and they're still letting them over. Literally letting people over that they are fully aware are at risk to the British public, are a risk to the British public. Still brought them over. Biggest betrayal since Brexit, this. Tories to lend arrest. Anyway, moving on, Dominic Cummings predicted all this. Pathological system working exactly as intended. Story is much worse than what's coming out now. Some of the people flown over are obviously dangerous terrorists and violent rapists as well, of course. Because a lot of these people were rejected initially, and then the data leak happened and they said, oh, everyone on the list, you're coming over. And he's made other tweets, obviously, where he's basically saying, oh, this isn't the only one. This is not the only injunction. There's many more that will make you want to scratch your eyes out. But not only that, people who were involved in the cabinet but not involved in this cover-up, thank God, have come out effectively to let us all know that, well, none of this actually makes sense. There's Johnny Mercer in an article basically saying the MOD are full of incompetent wombles, effectively, as is summarised by Paul Weston here, said that there are only about 1,000 Afghans actually fighting alongside Brits, and every single one of them has been refused entry to Britain by the Home Office on multiple occasions. And so why have a load of Afghanistanis, way more than actually fought with us, being allowed over with basically no links to the UK? It's an interesting article to go through, but I'm not going through it now. But he effectively does say there are people who fought with us and do have links to the UK in that they are still in contact with some of the soldiers they fought alongside. Okay, fair enough. They got rejected by the Foreign Office, though, and they're not even allowed over. Well, some people that we actually set up the damn scheme for are actually just trapped in Afghanistan or possibly even Iran. It's also confused as to why there was a super injunction, because apparently this list was posted to Facebook anyway and everyone knew about it. That's the other thing here. It's an interesting article to go through, as I say, but there's other things I need to go through in this video. Anyway, the Defence Minister is saying he's not sorry for this injunction that blocked the reporting of airlifts of 18,500 Afghans, despite the fact we knew that, well, a fair few of them were risky individuals. Though he thought the injunction would only last 4 months apparently, and he doesn't know why it was extended. It was extended to cover this up because it's a massive betrayal. People did not want 18,500 Afghans in, plus dependents. And yet, they've been brought over anyway. That's why it happened. Anyway, we're on to a bit of the political drama now. Richard Tice decisively wrote for The Telegraph saying Labour's immigration fiasco is just a continuation of Tory betrayal. No vetting procedure in place. We know there wasn't. We know that people were rejected and brought over anyway because they were risky individuals. We may be letting in sex offenders, terrorists and criminals. Yep, absolutely true. And I have to say, I'm getting fed up of people saying, oh, Tories are flanking reform to the right in immigration. It's not true. It's not remotely true. What happens is that reform don't shut out about immigration all the time, and so they take the least charitable interpretations of what's going on and run with it. It's not reflective of reality remotely, as this article suggests. After 2 years of secrecy enforced by the Tories, the scandal has been exposed. The shocking plan is already in effect, with 18,500 Afghans having already arrived. No vetting procedure in place, we're letting sex offenders, terrorists and criminals in. It has been revealed that several Afghans on this list have previously been rejected for violent or sexual assaults. Literally just letting them in, even after we've actually vetted them and said, no, they shouldn't come here. But, oh no, they might die because of a data leak that was already on Facebook, according to Johnny Mercer. And that means we have to let them all in. It's incredible. This is a massive failure of the British state, a huge threat to our national security, and just another example of the Tories betraying the trust of the British public. Even from the sidelines, this country is still suffering from years of Tory leadership. It really does beg the question of treason. Keeping MPs and the British public in the dark about importing thousands of unchecked, fighting-age males and their families is not our best interest. Absolutely. And I'm completely on board. Genuinely, investigate the people in the cabinet at the time for treason. I have no problem with that. I am sick to death of having to hear stories like this, and for effectively being told that I then have to pay for these Afghans to be put up in 4-star hotels and to be taught English. Despicable. Absolutely despicable. Heads need to roll for this. Anyway, if you want to look at what Reform plan to do with people like the Afghanis who came over and were not vetted, Tice says if this Labour government was looking out for the best interests of the British people, they would relocate all the Afghanistanis to a third-party country that was geographically and socially aligned with Afghanistan. They wouldn't force British families and children to live alongside Afghans who do not subscribe to our culture or belief system. What country comes at the top of the list for sexual assaults in the United Kingdom? Afghanistan. It is insulting for this cover-up to be justified by claims of national security. Mr Justice Chamberlain, the High Court judge presiding over the proceedings, questioned the need for secrecy on this arrangement, as this is a resettlement scheme of thousands of people entering the UK on the bill of the taxpayer. No one deserves the knowledge of who is moving here and how much it costs, more than the British citizen, who must live with these consequences. Yeah, effectively, not here. They should not come here. If they are refugees, throw them somewhere that is a safe third country that is much more aligned with how the Afghanistanis live. Again, I'm constantly told, Labour and Tories outflanking reform on the right. This isn't outflanking. This isn't outflanking at all. This is what we've asked for decades. Anyway, our Nige also naturally had a response to this absolutely ludicrous decision by the Cabinet back in 2022 to 2023, and here's what he had to say.
The Afghan scandal has broken. Extraordinary that a British government put a super injunction on all the British media that lasted for over 2 years to cover up a story of incompetence, dishonesty and a threat to our own national security.
Absolutely right. Let's take a look at the highlights from this.
Amongst the number that have come are convicted sex offenders. I am not, I promise you, making any of this up. And the total cost of the operation has been a staggering £7 billion.
Yeah, and Reform are likely going to stick on this message of your money has been used to help you not know anything about what the government are doing while they are bringing over a town's worth of Afghanistanis, some of whom, as he says, are convicted sex offenders, some of who are violent offenders as well, and some of who the government in their injunction document admitted are at risk of being radicalised and becoming terrorists. Incredible.
But don't let the Conservative Party, don't let Kemi Badenoch or that very odd little figure Chris Philp, who appears occasionally on our screens, to say, isn't it terrible? They caused it in the first place. And for this, they should never, ever be forgiven.
I do massively agree, and as I say, they've been silent for 24 hours. Even while making this video, I have seen absolutely nothing from the Jenrick crowd. Anyway, some of the cabinet ministers or ex-cabinet ministers have been asked about this specifically. Here's what Michael Gove had to say when asked about this injunction.
Were you aware of this super injunction?
Yes.
And when were you first told about it?
I was told about it in the final year in which I was in government.
Gove knew. It was 2024. Okay, fair enough, when he lost the election, he will not have had the legal protections from the super injunction, but still, he knew about it. Quite a few people knew about it. They all kept it hidden. Some people are in a worse position than others. I would say those who were aware of this and on the back benches and didn't use parliamentary privilege, probably the worst people in this whole debacle. Rees-Mogg was also interviewed, though I'm not necessarily going to go through these clips, we'll just go through the summary. He says that the Rishi Sunak, the Defence Secretary and the Cabinet Secretary will have been the ones that made the decision. However, the Home Secretary, the Chancellor and all relevant civil servants will have been informed. That, by the way, includes the Immigration Secretary, because of course the Immigration Secretary is going to be involved with an issue that has to do with a massive amount of immigration. Who was the Immigration Secretary at the time? Robert Jenrick. And this is why Zia Yusuf went off on one. The British government learnt of the data leak in August 2023. 24,000 Afghans secretly granted asylum, costing the British taxpayer up to £7 billion. The government covered it up. Who was in government? Well, the Home Secretary was Shiela Burrowes, the Immigration Minister was Robert Jenrick. Two people who, well, Shiela Burrowes certainly was one of the people who there were whispers of she might affect reform. No chance of that now, and frankly, I don't blame Reform for doing this. You cannot have a Home Secretary who knew about all this and decided to keep quiet. Especially since, again, she had parliamentary privilege and would not have come under the laws that super injunctions apply on the rest of us, because you actually have true free speech in Parliament. But also Robert Jenrick, he literally quit as Immigration Minister because he wasn't happy that the Rwanda scheme wasn't going through the way he'd like it, which, fair enough, I've got no problem with that. But then he decided to keep this under wraps. Because as we heard from Jacob Rees-Mogg, well, we didn't hear, but as we read from Jacob Rees-Mogg, relevant civil servants will have been notified on this. That absolutely includes Robert Jenrick. He was literally Immigration Minister at the time, and he kept it hidden with the rest of them. Again, both Shiela and Jenrick have been completely silent on this. In fact, most Tories have been silent for the past 24 hours, because there is absolutely no defence of this. As far as I can tell, it's over. God knows what the cope is going to be. There's been news that the 1922 committee is having a chat with Kemi Badenoch today. There's rumours there's going to be a reshuffle in the shadow cabinet. How that's happened before there's a reshuffle in the actual cabinet over on the Labour side, I have no idea. But this is how catastrophic it is for the Tories. They're screwed. It's over. Anyone, as far as I'm concerned, either not attacking them for the past 24 hours or defending them to some extent, as far as I'm concerned, is not going to make it. It's over. Again, this is another test. This is like in the past when effectively the question is, where do your loyalties lie? And today, as far as I'm concerned, if you're not attacking the people in government at the time, then your loyalties lie with them. Because there's no excuse for this. This is the biggest betrayal since Brexit. They hid this from you, and they used your money to hide it from you while paying for all of them to effectively be on welfare for life, and that's not even an exaggeration either. These people, as much as they've come out and been against immigration with their rhetoric for the past 2 years or whatever, it's not good enough. They made their bed, they can lie in it. I think the most ironic thing is that the last tweets from, well, Shiela Burrowes and Robert Jenrick are to do with the asylum system. Again, this is the last tweet as of the time recording from Burrowes, just before the bombshell dropped at about 10 AM on the 15th. You're about to open a new asylum accommodation in my constituency. You're full of nonsense, in reply to Keir Starmer. Well, Shiela, you covered up the fact that we had hundreds of thousands of Afghanistanis come over, knowing full well that some of them were criminals and at risk of becoming terrorists. So yeah, no mercy whatsoever as far as I can tell. You should never be in politics again. Jenrick's last tweet about an hour before Shiela Burrowes was about Palestinians using the ECHR to enter the UK for medical treatment. It's not a one-off, it's been happening for years. Yeah, years in which you were an immigration minister, years in which you were in government, years of which you were standing with a party that frankly still stands by this and helped cover up even worse crimes. Robert Jenrick has completely shot all his credibility over this. That's why he said nothing, by the way. And this is why pretty much every hit against him is landing. And yet there are people on the dork right tacitly defending it. Tory simps are literally at the moment effectively saying, oh, Robert Jenrick might not have known about it, or he might not have known about it, he didn't cover anything up. Why is he being silent then? And why is it that we have literal Tories like Jacob Rees-Mogg letting us know the truth, because he is trustworthy in that way, letting us know that people relevant to the situation would have known, which is obviously including the immigration minister. Honestly, I've had my doubts about Jenrick for some time, and as far as I'm concerned, this has all confirmed them. We literally have no choice but to vote reform. Are they perfect? No, I've never claimed that, and I don't know why people do claim that. Are they doing the right thing to win elections? Well, they're top of the polls still. Are they saying the right things at the right time? Absolutely. Does that guarantee a Britain of prosperous future? Not necessarily. However, I 100% know that the Uniparty need to die. This is a bigger betrayal than Brexit. You know, Boris Johnson betrayed us as well, by the way. Let's not forget that, with the whole Brexit debacle. Before that, obviously, you had Theresa May and David Cameron, who helped throw open the floodgates as well with immigration. And they've kept us completely stagnant for all those years too. The record that they are supposed to be good on, which is the economy, they haven't done a particularly good job with. Okay, they improved it from Labour. It's not exactly difficult, because it's never difficult to improve from a socialist government, because people, at the end of the day, if they are free to do as they will just improve the economy naturally, because that's what they want to do. Dead in the water, this party. I will not be happy until I see them all out of the public eye, and not making money, as Zia goes through in a second, from doing speeches to big businesses and things like that to talk about nonsense. Honestly, it's just a way to keep the donations going. Anyway, he was not done with Robert Jenrick, because Jenrick has been having a go at reform for quite some time and is clearly the biggest threat to them from within the Tories, so I don't blame Zia Yusuf for going hard on this. Jenrick was immigration minister when the government learned of the worst data breach in British history. He was immigration minister when the government got a super injunction, the worst cover-up in recent history. 24,000 Afghans get asylum, costing $7 billion. It's unforgivable. And obviously there's a tweet from back in 2022 where Robert Jenrick was pleased to welcome to Newark Mr. and Mrs. Sadat, with obviously 3 kids. This is a man who likely came over on this scheme and brought dependents. This is probably quite typical of the other 18,500 Afghans that have come over so far. They've probably brought on average 4 or 5 people with them. Hell, there's been news of one who brought 14. Zia also went back a bit to find what Robert Jenrick was saying around the time of the injunction, and, well, as it turns out, Jenrick was in fact boasting about the relocation of people from Afghanistan into Britain. Again, this is a man. This is why I've been sceptical for some time. This is a man who 2 years ago was out and proud about it being immigration minister to settle people here, but actually on the front for the media he's saying, no, we have to have the Rwanda plan. Total nonsense. It was always total nonsense. Sorry, I've been saying this for some time, but the man whose best known work in the government was quitting as immigration minister was never going to save the Tories, and I don't know why people mean themselves into that position. Anyway, Yusuf did some more research and found that Ben Wallace who played the leading role in perpetrating the worst cover-up in our lifetimes. I think that the grooming gangs are on there, but I get what he means. He now makes big money speaking at events for private banks, while struggling Brits foot the bill for billions and live in a more dangerous country. He's the ultimate Tory. Yeah, and a lot of them will be like this, no doubt about it. And yeah, it's why I'm largely with Tice. This needs to be investigated, and these people need to go to jail if they did break the law and, frankly, commit treason against Britain and her people. Which it's hard to argue they didn't. Anyway, the Labour line on super injunctions is obviously this one's bad and was all the Tories' fault. When asked if there were any more, Defence Secretary John Healey said there are no other super injunctions in place. Which obviously you would do, but is probably a lie. But the thing is that, as mentioned before, PMQs, nothing about this. And this even annoyed the centrist dad podcasters. A stunning and shameful PMQs. Parliament has been denied its right to scrutinise the government for 2 years via the constitutionally unprecedented super injunction. Absolutely right. Huge amounts of public money has been spent in secret. 100,000 Afghans put in danger. Well, iffy that. I'm more bothered about the fact they all came over without any scrutiny whatsoever. And did any backbench MP get up and ask the PM about it, express any outrage? As a democratically elected politician, ask the PM to rule out it ever happening again? No, not a word. Pathetic. If you're wondering why Reform didn't say anything as a backbench MP, from what I can tell, none of them were picked to ask a question. 4 MPs, you don't get a chance to ask a question every week. No doubt in my mind that they will be bringing it up in future parliamentary debates, however. Because the amount they've gone on about these things, no way. No way they're going to be ignoring this and letting it slide, obviously. It's one of their main issues. Of course they'll go on about it. But in the meantime, I suppose just to wrap this video up, I'll let you know what you can do. There's not a lot, I'll be honest. I rarely sign petitions these days. But given that the Tory government has secretly granted 24,000 Afghans asylum in the UK at the cost of up to probably over £7 billion, Reform UK demands an independent judge-led inquiry into what happened, who knew, and when. And so there's a petition for that. Petitions don't tend to go very far, but at least it's a show of outrage for something like this. So you'll find it in the links below. Go sign it, and hopefully, I think it sounds like Labour are going to put an inquiry front and centre anyway, so we'll see what happens. For now, though, Tories to lend a rest. Absolutely no reason to vote for them these days, from what I can tell. Suella just threw out a statement on the whole thing. It's 2 pages long, and it effectively says, none of this was really my fault. I did know about this, but was bound by ministerial code not to say anything about it. Oh, by the way, and I didn't have parliamentary privilege for whatever reason, so was literally shut up about this. Okay, that might all be true. Why are you still with this party that basically stand by this record, then? That's the big question. And there's no answer on that. Her husband joined Reform, said barely anything positive about it, and left today as well. As far as I'm concerned, they seem to have been Tory boys the whole time. I have no better explanation for it. So there we go. Well, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So do subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment if you enjoyed the video. Do also become a member or leave super chats or super thanks if you think I've earned them. Videos out as and when I can make them, of course, but Thursday we have Hollow Knight. I'll be starting off gameplay of that and a playthrough of that, over the next few weeks. And next Tuesday we obviously have Tosh Talks. But that's everything I have for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.